This film is about how entrepreneurship can play a key role in the fight against poverty. Despite massive flows of aid over the last 50 years, poverty remains endemic. More than 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. If poor countries are to generate their own sustainable wealth, the entrepreneurial spirit of all of the people needs to be unleashed. In this film, we travel to 3 countries: Peru, Mozambique, and Pakistan, to meet a range of entrepreneurs, to discover how far their work is helping to reduce poverty. If entrepreneurs are to do more, then we urgently need to rethink the role of aid and investment.
Aid is wonderful, is needed, but aid really is no more than a painkiller, a morphine, a Panadol. It helps to ease the pain. It doesn't solve the problem. We need surgery. We need really to tackle the root cause of poverty. And that can only be tackled by investment. There's no other way. We need to build infrastructure. We need to build industry. We need to build agriculture that create jobs, that put money in the pockets of people, put food on the table, not only today, but tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And that's what is needed.
You do need aid in the poorest countries because there's no way that they can afford to put in the health and education services or even the agricultural development support that's needed to help people get out of poverty. You need that as a base. And many of the countries, I think about the East Asian Tigers, have put a lot of energy and money in their early stages into making sure that, for example, there are good education systems. But those things in their own right don't deliver economic growth.
I think there's a misconception in the developed part of the world that development is their responsibility. It's not. Development is the responsibility of the people in the developing countries. And the best thing that the developed countries can do is to allow the people in the developing countries to define for themselves what is development.
Peru is one of the poorest countries in Latin America, but the economy's been growing in recent years. Lake Titicaca is home to the Aymara people. It's 4,000 meters above sea level, and the climate is harsh. But there's an entrepreneurial spirit which is beginning to flourish. With the help of a small loan, microcredit, Gloria has started her own business. She borrowed just $100, but it was enough to buy nets and set up this fish farm on the lake.
Mi vida personal ha cambiado porque siempre antes con la pesca casi un poquito bajo era, no dinero faltaba, así. Y ahora un poquito con eso ya estoy feliz, ¿no? Siquiera algo va a haber para mis hijos, ¿no? Para hacer estudiar, para ayudarme a nosotros, a mi familia misma.
Microcredit is a worldwide movement which began in Bangladesh in the 1970s. It involves giving very small loans to poor entrepreneurs who can't borrow from commercial banks because they have no credit history and nothing to offer as collateral. The microcredit for these women came from a local charity called ProMujer, but it has to be paid back with interest.
Acá en el campo, en el área rural, no hay leyes que normen la propiedad. Por eso mismo nosotros, cuando damos un préstamo, confiamos en la palabra de la mujer.
The fisherwomen come to the local market every day to sell their catch.
Bueno, ProMujer busca como objetivo empoderar a la mujer. Para eso trabaja mucho lo que es capacitación en negocios. Les enseñamos, por ejemplo, a reconocer cuáles son establecer sus ganancias, sus costos, su inversión, para que pueda tener una idea clara y elementos empresariales y poder salir adelante.
Francisca and her daughter Sonia have also received a loan from ProMujer to set up a fish farm on the lake. Francisca has spent much of her life on the move, trying to earn a living in Lima and other cities.
Es más despierta, porque nanaga cambio, te. Progresa ña o ayuda, porque hanika o kits de lo fácil es shen, digamos, shenane con la nanaga shen choro ganapte. Pues por junto 300 no está primero, y así quiere con más harto platita. Seguro que ya cansa altas en esto, y 300 para 4 redes no me ve. Con 4 redes sacamos un valor de 10 soles, carachi, diario. Ya con eso nos sustentamos.
I think that one of the biggest differences between ProMujer and the rest of some other institutions is that we're focused on women because we see them as the engine to help their families and to bring their kids to a different level. We have been, from the very beginning, very active listeners. So every single program that we have developed in ProMujer was as an answer to what they needed, to what they were asking. That's why at the beginning we were only a training institution. And then little by little they began to ask more and more. We included health training and we included business training, and they asked us, now we need money to begin a business.
Creating jobs is a key issue in Peru. Though the government's policy of encouraging foreign investment has paid off, leading to high rates of economic growth, it hasn't translated into jobs.
The investments and big companies are mostly in mining and extractive industries in Peru and do not create a lot of jobs. They create a very small number of jobs, and so their impact in poverty is small. The poverty rate now is like 44%. And well, 44% is a lot of poverty for a country of middle income like Peru is categorized.
Since poverty is higher in rural areas, the Peruvian capital, Lima, continues to grow. But work is scarce, so most try to earn a living by creating their own jobs and working as small entrepreneurs. Today is the birthday of Sarita Colonia, patron saint of poor people. Like many who are here, she came to Lima from the countryside. This is her shrine.
Por favor, avancen, comprendan, van llegando, van pasando. ¿Cuál es la razón por la que hay tantas personas acá el día de hoy?
Porque ella es muy buena, muy milagrosa. Sí, hay mucha pobreza. Eso sí es cierto. Y ella ve a todos los que necesitan, nos dan.
O sea, no es verdad de que el pueblo esté, digamos, en bonanza o tenga alguna posibilidad de mejorar. No existe mejora en el Perú. Y cada día la situación económica de la gente pobre va decayendo más, más y más. Cada gobierno que entra es peor. Y ustedes lo pueden comprobar.
Many of those who come to Lima from the rural areas are forced to live illegally as squatters, unable to realize their economic potential.
What you've got here in Pamplona is the higher part of the mountains that surround Lima, the ones that are most distant from the cities, and therefore where there is the least development. So generally most of this starts off with squatting. People get together, form a critical mass, and sell tickets to an invasion, and then award on the basis of blueprints different parcels of land to themselves and make a primary human settlement. You can see by the way the electricity is organized that they're stealing it. They're taking it from the main sources and redistributing it among themselves. You will see also that even the taxis and the forms of transport are probably mostly illegal. They're not supposed to be transporting. So the very characteristic of all of this, it's illegality or extra legality. There is no clean water. So the water trucks distribute the water. And that costs many, many more times than if you had water. I pay less for water than any of these poor people do. So one of the first things that's important of why you want to have property in place is because by putting an address where you can collect the rates, you can afford to give people cheap water.
Property rights are even more important as collateral for loans. These informal settlements are full of small entrepreneurs, but without property rights, it's hard for them to develop their businesses. Despite this lack of collateral, many commercial banks have now started to lend money to small entrepreneurs. Mi Banco has branches in all the poorest districts in Lima, like Huaycan, one of the biggest informal settlements.
El banco que somos es un banco muy diferente, en mi banco, a lo que es la banca tradicional. La banca tradicional, el cliente va al banco. En mi banco es totalmente todo lo contrario. Es el banco que va al cliente. Y va al cliente a través de lo que son los asesores de negocio. Van a asesorar a los clientes que en su gran volumen son informales. Son personas en su gran mayoría que por primera vez tienen acceso al crédito.
Since they have no collateral, interest rates are high, up to 50%, but business is booming. Mi Banco is giving 45,000 loans a month. The high interest rate includes the cost of the advisors who help clients develop their business skills.
Pero gran parte de nuestro país, y creo que mucho en Latinoamérica, es capacitación. Al nivel que estamos llegando es capacitar al cliente, capacitarlo en cosas básicas. Y es justamente capacitarlos en principios de marketing, los más pequeños, de ventas, de stocks, de manejo de stocks, principios de contabilidad, llevar las cuentas básicas.
Julio Solis lives in Huaycan. He was a factory worker with just a few dollars in savings when he set up his own business 4 years ago by making and selling 2 or 3 cookers. But he needed capital, and all the banks turned him down.
Pues para mí a veces un poco que me daba que darme para atrás, porque no tenía dinero. Y es ahí en donde empiezo a tocar la puerta de todo lo que es los bancos financieros, ¿no? O sea, toco la puerta y pues nadie me daba, me decía no.
Eventually, Solis tried Mi Banco. He was asking for just $150. They agreed to lend him $125. It was enough to get him started. He set up a workshop next to his family home. He quickly paid off the loan and borrowed more money. Now, this small workshop manufactures 150 cookers a week.
Y ese es mi sueño, ¿no? Crecer, ampliar y dar trabajo a más jóvenes, tantos jóvenes que hacen cola en tantas fábricas desde las 4 de la mañana buscando un puesto de trabajo y no los hay. Entonces, yo creo que dando 5 o 6 personas estoy contribuyendo con mi país también, mi parte de la población. Ese es mi sueño.
If Solis and other entrepreneurs are to realize their dreams, the Peruvian government needs to bring property rights and the rule of law to these informal settlements. Microfinance is an effective measure to tackle poverty. But is it also a way of building an economy from the bottom up?
Microfinance is interesting as a phenomenon because it does seem to reach a sector of the population which probably would not have been reached if the movement had not come into place. What I think is a mistake is thinking that that's a solution to everything. Because it's obvious that the West did not grow on microfinance. You know, you didn't create Hoffmann La Roche in Switzerland on microfinance. You didn't create Lloyd's of Britain, Microsoft with microfinance. You created with macrofinance.
Although microfinance clearly has its limits, we've seen how it can help many become successful entrepreneurs. But economic growth also needs big investment to create large numbers of jobs. That's not just true in Peru, but all over the world. Mozambique was once one of the poorest countries in the world. It gained its independence late in 1975, and a long and bloody civil war followed. Since the end of the war, the economy has changed dramatically, from state-run to free market. But Mozambique remains heavily dependent on foreign aid and needs to expand its private sector so it can generate its own wealth.
The private sector is a very important tool because there's capital which comes, which the government doesn't have, and that capital will be converted into jobs. It will be converted into taxes. It will be converted in creation of small enterprises around it, which are complementary to its own work. It may be used to even boost the new national private sector. And so it's a component for economic growth.
The rates of growth on average in the last 20 years have been around 7% per year on average. But the growth has been confined to a small number of companies and very specific areas of the country, mostly in cities, in urban areas.
Most Mozambicans live in the countryside, and paid employment is rare. The need for major investment, which creates jobs, is urgent. There's one success story which suggests a way forward. The cashew nut industry is based in the northern province of Nampula. Antonio Miranda is a Mozambican who's become an entrepreneur. He was an executive with Coca-Cola before setting up his own business.
Probably I need challenges, and cashew nut was available, was something I got interesting to. And money-wise, for the construction of the factory was done with my own money, my savings.
Cashew nuts have been grown in this part of the world for hundreds of years. In the 1970s, Mozambique produced more cashews than any other country. But by the 90s, the industry had collapsed when the World Bank, in its drive against protectionism, persuaded the government to abolish an export tax on raw nuts. The nuts went abroad to be processed in India. The industry's recent revival owes a lot to TechnoServe, an American NGO funded by the US government through US aid.
We arrived only 10 years ago, which may seem like a long time, but in cashew terms, perhaps not that long. And at the time, the industry was in kind of a crisis. And what we wanted to do, or what we did do, is to take a business approach and say, can this industry be competitive? And the answer was yes.
TechnoServe wanted to encourage new investors to come in and open processing factories. Miranda was the first to work with them.
The focus of our intervention was on worker training, management training, introducing technology, and basically the same technology as India and Vietnam.
The industry is labor-intensive, so it creates a large number of jobs. 1,500 people work in this factory, but absenteeism is high and productivity is lower than in other countries. The minimum wage is $55 a month.
I agree that the government puts a minimum wage and the people need to get money to do a decent living. But the cashew nut is not an attractive business to pay huge salaries. It's just not.
Miranda and the other cashew nut processors buy almost all their nuts on the local market from more than 100,000 small farmers like Melito Maciel. Some of his trees are old and don't produce anymore. Others were destroyed in the recent cyclone.
Praticamente cajueiros aqui nos tempos eram volta de 100 palantas, da ponta até na ponta. Mas agora outras palantas já estão crescidas, não produzem. Que produzem são volta de uns 40, 45.
Melito couldn't afford to buy new plants, but now he's been given some in compensation for those he lost in the cyclone. He won't earn money from the new trees for several years.
Isso, semear, plantar até crescer. 2 anos e meio. O terceiro ano começa a produzir. Então, esse espaço dos 3 anos é longo para nós que sobrevivemos para isso. É muito longe.
The success of the cashew industry in creating jobs in rural areas has lessons for other parts of the Mozambican economy.
Production reached 100,000 tons this year. It's a spectacular success. And it's a spectacular success because it has done everything that the World Bank said you were not supposed to do. It has protection for the sector. You can't export unprocessed, unshelled nuts early in the season. It has subsidized credit. Now, this is how you build an industry in Mozambique. This could be replicated in a huge number of sectors.
We shouldn't only say, let's open the doors and see what comes in it. It comes to us, or let's throw the net and see what we can get. We need to, in a way, to be selective. Say, what do we want? What kind of investment we want, in which areas we want, and go and look for it.
The role of TechnoServe, working alongside private investors in the cashew industry, also shows that aid can be used to kickstart an industry when private money may be reluctant to make the initial investment.
You have to have direct state intervention to build the private sector. The private sector does not appear as if by magic. It is created. If you are, say, going to create a mango project, it will be 7 years before that is profitable. A lot of your original investment is in research and development of the right varieties. It's in setting up irrigation systems, setting up marketing systems. That's not money which is recoverable. No private sector company is going to do that without state support in the first instance.
But public money has to be spent wisely. The Mozambican government has been keen to attract mega projects, like this aluminium processing plant in Maputo. The World Bank's decision to invest in the project has been controversial. The plant is run by Mozal, a consortium led by the Anglo-Australian mining company BHP Billiton. Mozal imports alumina from Australia. All the aluminium it produces is exported, so the company makes a significant contribution to the Mozambican economy.
We need to go beyond what the figures would tell you, because the figures don't actually show resource flows in the economy. What they show is that you have exports, you have imports, and what's the balance of that? But the balance belongs to the companies, not to the economy. So when you look, for example, at Mozal, and you look at the trade balance, you say, well, Mozal has eliminated 2/3 of the trade deficit. Great. But then Mozal doesn't pay taxes.
The amount of public money initially invested in Mozal was huge, $1 billion, and it created just 1,500 jobs. Mega projects continue to have an enduring appeal for African nations.
I think we are a model. We host a number of dignitaries from other African countries who want to see what a mega project can do to their country. So yeah, a number of people look at us as a role model that others can adopt.
The World Bank was instrumental in helping to finance Mozal through the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, a branch of the bank which supports private investment.
The origins were very much the aluminium industry itself contacting with government of Mozambique. And one of the decisions made was to, in response to these contacts, was to see whether steps could be taken to attract an industry of international repute of a very high standard to Mozambique. The role of the bank in this was to basically, through the IFC, was to support some of the initial investment.
Mozal is now highly successful, with profits of $500 million a year, and yet it still has a substantial amount of public money invested in it. Critics question whether this is the right policy for development banks.
There is some criticism about Mozal that, well, the number of people employed by Mozal is small compared with the volume of investment made. But I think these criticisms sometimes are not fair. First, because Mozal was the first biggest project to be brought to this country. So it put Mozambique on the map. People started to say, oh, it's possible to do business in Mozambique.
If you look at the overall impact of Mozal in the economy, it's very, very weak. And so it doesn't have a trickle-down effect.
It would not have gone ahead had it not been financed from the international community in the first place. You're now getting major titanium mines, again financed by the international community. To what end? Mozambique gets very little out of those.
It's the role of the Mozambican government to decide which sectors of the economy to promote. But sustainable development is best achieved by focusing on businesses which create jobs and can grow organically.
You can look through a series of areas in which Mozambique has huge potentials. Mangoes, lychees, sesame seed, macadamia nuts. All of these are crops which would have huge labor input, would do great things to reduce poverty. I mean, the Mozal project had more than $1 billion of investment. If that $1 billion had been put into developing real Mozambican industry, real Mozambican agriculture, the country would have been transformed by now.
Aid is very significant for Mozambique, where it accounts for more than half of the government's budget. The country's tax base is so small that without it, there would be little money available for health or education. But there's a tension between the wishes of the donors and those of the government.
Even if we go to the World Bank or to the IMF and we speak with the leaders of these organizations and we feel good, when it comes to the experts who come to the country, you would find really that they are there to dictate what ought to be done. And they would say, you take it or you leave it.
But in recent years, there's been a growing recognition that donors mustn't be so dictatorial.
Receiving countries who get aid should first of all make sure they have their own plans and that they use the aid for long-term purposes, particularly for the basic services, which will be the rock on which they can really build their economies, their education and so on. they also have to have good governance, and that is a real responsibility in those countries.
Donors have an important role to play in promoting good governance. In Mozambique, the government is under pressure to do more to address corruption.
Good governance attracts investment. If an African country is not seen to be abiding by the rule of law, if the laws are not clear, if it takes long time to seek justice, justice delayed is justice denied. If human rights are not observed, if openness, clear economic policies are not there, all these things will hinder investment.
In Mozambique, aid is essential to pay for health, education and infrastructure. It can also be used alongside private investment. If aid is used in this way, it can help create the right conditions for businesses to grow and generate wealth. But foreign direct investment is worth much more money than aid. What impact does it have on the fight against poverty? Pakistan is well known for welcoming foreign investors. Globally, according to the UN World Investment Report, there are 77,000 multinational companies which have created 62 million jobs in developing countries without costing a penny of public money. But their presence inevitably means change. Pakistan's rapidly growing population and expanding economy makes it attractive to investors.
We're a world food company, food nutrition company, and we recognize that this is, I think, the 6th most populated country in the world. It's certainly one of the growing markets, over 160 odd million people. It's developing, there's an emerging middle class over the longer term.
At its Shekhapura plant near Lahore, Nestlé produces UHT milk, fruit juice, mineral water, milk powder and yogurt. Nestlé came to Pakistan 20 years ago, when it established a partnership with a local food company. It's been here through some difficult times, military dictatorship, suicide bombings, and as a result, the company wants higher returns on its investment.
Yeah, it has to be profitable. If you want to have that sustainable, it has to be profitable. And I would say even more, and this might sound like a provocation, but normally you need to have a slightly higher margin than in a fully developed country, because your risk factor is substantially higher.
Now, most of the time what happens is that the host governments, including Pakistani government, they become so desperate for foreign investment that they waive off most of the terms and conditions that would be applied on any local investor, giving them tax rebates, allowing them to take the profit back, no limitation on the minimum investment or the maximum investment, no limitation that such and such type of people would be employed here, giving them real estate at throwaway prices and all other privileges.
Let's be quite frank, we are first of all commercial, because we have a responsibility vis-à-vis our shareholders. But we have established many years ago a clear dogma which says it is not good enough that an investment is positive for the shareholders. It has to be at the same time positive for the host country where we are in.
In Pakistan, Nestlé is primarily a dairy-based business. It's been responsible for the growth in the packaged milk market. Nestlé's product, Milk Pack, is the market leader.
What we've done here is we've really invested in a broad-based business which is relying upon a milk collection scheme which touches up to about 150,000 small farmers. And by reaching out to these farmers and the people involved in the process of that collection and ultimately the distribution of that product, we are really impacting upon roughly 1 million people here in Pakistan.
Nestlé believes it is helping to tackle poverty. As a result of the growing commercial market for milk, small farmers who used to have 2 or 3 buffaloes to provide milk for their families have expanded their herds. Packaged UHT milk is aimed at middle-class consumers, roughly 15% of the population, and it's too expensive for most Pakistanis, who still get their milk at the local milk shop.
Traditionally, the sellers of fresh milk, they have been doing it for centuries. Now, all of a sudden, it's not only ads in the papers, but also even in hospitals and clinics, some physicians who keep on advocating for UHT milk. Now, of course, one can see technically that if the milk is pasteurized, it would be free of contaminants, but claiming that all milk that is not pasteurized is not fit for your good health and is always contaminated, I think that is a bad practice. That is very unfair, and for a common person, a lay person can easily get influenced by that.
Nestlé has an interest in promoting development in Pakistan, and it's joined forces with the United Nations Development Programme to launch a training project targeted at women in rural areas. Riza Kiran has trained to become a veterinary nurse, vaccinating and treating sick animals.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਲੋਕ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੁਫਤ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਤਨਖਾਹਾਂ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੁਫਤ ਕੰਮ ਕਰੋ ਤੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਟੀਕਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਇਨਸ਼ਾਅੱਲਾ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਜਾਨਵਰ ਠੀਕ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਦਵਾਈ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਸਹੀ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀ ਇੰਜੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਉਣ ਤੇ ਜ਼ਰਾ ਮਸਲਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਲੈ ਔਰਤ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਗਾਂਵ ਵਾਲੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ
In Pakistan, we've seen how multinationals can help in the fight against poverty. And for women like Riza, they bring positive change by creating new opportunities.
It is our interest that through this partnership with Nestlé, we are able to demonstrate to a lot of other private sector companies that development and business can go hand in hand. And it is simply a matter of investing in your client. And Nestle and Engro and Halla or Kisans or Milk Packs or whatever are the other dairy companies, their clients are the rural women because women are the primary livestock managers in this country. And it makes sense for them to invest some money from their profit into their capacity so that they have more productive livestock.
In this film, in 3 continents, we've seen how, in the right circumstances, entrepreneurs can thrive. They need capital, a clearing away of bureaucratic hurdles, access to knowledge and training. Aid can help to create the conditions for investment, but it can never be a substitute for that investment.
I would say that the developed countries can help our countries out of poverty by letting us do what is best for us. Policy space in order for us to work out our own strategies. The strategies imported from the IMF, the World Bank, from the donors are good for them, but not for us.
Peru, Mozambique and Pakistan have each found a different path to follow, for it's clear there's no magic fix. But there are some common themes.
We need to focus on infrastructure, the arteries of commerce. Do you have good telecommunications? Do you have roads, electricity, power, clean water? All the basic infrastructures are really necessary for the development of the country. Education. So if that was the hardware, the infrastructure, the software is the people. And we need to focus on education, on the people. Those are the people who are going to create wealth, who are going to run the businesses.
The creation of wealth in the developing world is in everyone's interest, for aid itself is simply not sustainable.
There's never enough money to alleviate poverty. There's just not enough in the world. People will end up creating their own wealth the same way Europeans created their own wealth. Nobody came and aided you. You had to create it yourself. That's the only sure way to do it.
Emerging countries do need support and money, both private and public. But above all, they need trust from donors and investors, so they can choose their own path to sustainable development.